السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله يدافع عن الذين آمنوا إن الله لا يحب كل خوان كفور. أذن للذين يقاتلون بأنهم ظلموا وإن الله على نصرهم لقدير. الذين أخرجوا من ديارهم بغير حق إلا أن يقولوا ربنا الله ولولا دفع الله الناس بعضهم ببعض لهدمت صوامع وبيع وصلوات ومساجد يذكر فيها اسم الله كثيرا ولينصرن الله من ينصره إن الله لقوي عزيز. الذين إن مكناهم في الأرض أقاموا الصلاة وآتوا الزكاة وأمروا بالمعروف ونهوا عن المنكر ولله عاقبة الأمور. وإن يكذبوك فقد كذبت قبلهم قوم نوح وعاد وثمود وقوم إبراهيم وقوم لوط وأصحاب مدين وكذب موسى فأمليت للكافرين ثم أخذتهم فكيف كان نكير. صدق الله العظيم. God will certainly defend the believers. Surely God does not like the traitors who deny the truth. Permission is granted to those who fight because they are oppressed. God is certainly able to give help to those who were driven away from their homes for no other reason than they said, "Our Lord is God." And if God had not restrained some men through some others, monasteries, churches, synagogues, and mosques, where the name of God is honored most, would have been raised. God will surely help those who help him. Verily, God is all-powerful and almighty. Those who would be firm in devotion give zakat and enjoin what is good and forbid what is wrong. If we gave them authority in the land, but the resultants of things rest with God. If they accuse you of falsehood, remember that the people of Nuh, Ad, and Thamud had accused before, and the people of Ibrahim and Lut, and the people of Madian too. The people of Musa were also accused of lying. So I seized them. How was my attribution then? Jazakumullahu khairan.
Takbir. Takbir. It gives me absolute pleasure to introduce and welcome Sheikh Suhail Mullah and Sister Sabreen Azhar to the MCA community. Sheikh Suhail Mullah is the director of the Los Angeles branch of Khalil Center and Community and Spiritual Psychological Wellness Center. Sheikh Suhail currently resides as a resident scholar in the Islamic Society of West Valley in Cogna Park, California. He also serves as the IOK Muslim chaplain at Cal State University Northridge. In addition, Sheikh Suhail Mullah serves as the religious advisor to the UMMA Community Clinic and is the co-founder of the Muslim Marriage Rejuvenation Retreat. Sheikh Suhail has worked as a co-worker at LAUSD and Silnar Juvenile Court, has served as the Imam of the Islamic Society of Orange County and interim executive director and director of mental health at the Access California Services. Sheikh Suhail resides in Los Angeles with his wife and 4 children. He is a student of the outdoors and enjoys hiking, camping, backpacking, woodworking, and gardening in his free time. Sister Sabrine Azhar is a manager of the Khalil Center Bay Area branch and is also the Marriage Family Therapist Associate. It is an honor to have you both here tonight, and now I'd like to pass it to Sheikh Suhail and Sister Sabrine.
بسم الله. السلام عليكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أفضل الخلق وسيد المرسلين، سيدنا وحبيبنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. It's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. This is a heavy subject matter that we are talking about, because the days that we are living in are very heavy, and I don't, on certain levels, it is very hard for me to speak to what is happening now in Palestine and what our responsibility is from the standpoint of, I think a lot of us know what we need to do, where we need to turn, what we need to participate in. But there's just a lot of reassurance that we need to provide for each other, and being there for each other in this time, getting that word of solace, getting that reminder is always important. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَذَكِّرْ فَإِنَّ الذِّكْرَ تَنْفَعُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. And remind, because the reminder brings benefit to the believers. And so I think that's what tonight is about, really just a reminder to ourselves of our responsibility and to our brothers and sisters in Palestine. But today we're, I think, kind of focusing on a reminder more so about ourselves. What do we need to do for ourselves in this difficult time? And so I want to focus a little bit about, like, me as an individual. What do I need to do, given that my heart is so heavy, given that I'm at sometimes at different points in the day overwhelmed by emotions and feelings, given that if I even look at one image of someone that has been killed or injured in a horrible way, or read a story about anyone in Gaza, and now the intensity of the siege of the West Bank is also increasing. When I touch any of that information, I just, I tear up just thinking about it. Even at the slightest mention of it, the emotions, they take hold. So I want to talk a little bit about my responsibility to myself. How do I conduct myself? How do I carry myself? What are some things that I need to be more aware of? And so maybe I'm going to talk to myself tonight, and because I need this reminder for myself, right? I'm talking to my own heart, and then hopefully my heart will talk to all of yours. And so I just want to share a few thoughts. One of the things that we read about in the Quran constantly, and that I think we don't fully, that we talk about oftentimes as theory, and then the reality hits, and some of us were ready for that reality when it hits, and others of us maybe still have some a ways to go. And what I'm talking about is the narrative in the Quran about trial and tribulation, fitna and bala. And we find again and again, our young brother Bilal read some ayat that reflected upon that as well. We talk about again and again in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us of what is guaranteed for us in this life. And this is interesting when you look at the Quran and you see what the guarantee is. It's maybe not what we might think in terms of, well, what is the what is the state of the believer? What is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises us in this dunya? And some people think that, Islam is supposed to be this overwhelming, or what's the word I'm looking for? This victorious force, or this, this entity in the world that is always going to be on top. And if we are not on top, then there's something wrong with us. But when in fact you look at the Quran in a very interesting way, you see that it's actually the opposite. This is my own read, and I'll share some reflections from a couple of other people. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks again and again and again about the fact that trial and tribulation is guaranteed. So, and you can just read off the ayat one after the other. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in the ayah that you all know in Surah Al-Baqarah, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم, ولا تقولوا لمن يقتل في سبيل الله أموات بل أحياء ولكن لا تشعرون ولنبلونكم بشيء من الخوف والجوع ونقص من الأموال والأنفس والثمرات وبشر الصابرين. That Allah tells us He's going to try us in so many different ways. He's going to put us to task. Our life is going to be difficult on many levels, in so many ways. وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ, with fear, anxiety. It's going to overtake us at times. And hunger, and the loss of life, and the loss of crops, and the loss of health, and we are going to be compromised in so many different ways. We're not going to be at our optimal. The world around us is not going to be beautiful and and glittery and all of that. In fact, it's going to be the opposite. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in Surah Al-Rum, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم, بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم, ألف لام ميم, أحسب الناس أن يتركوا أن يقولوا آمنا وهم لا يفتنون. That do people think that they are going to be left to say, I believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then they're not going to be tested? To be tested is as if it's the default. To be tested is the default. To be in a state of tribulation, to be going through something, some trial in our lives individually, or as a Muslim ummah collectively, as if it's the default state. There's always something going on. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Baqarah, أَمْ حَسِبْتُمْ أَن تَدْخُلُوا الْجَنَّةَ وَلَمَّا يَأْتِكُمْ مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ خَلَوْا مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ, that you will be given Jannah and you will not be tested like the people before were tested. And on and on and on. If you read the Quran and you understand this narrative, it's important that we have this mindset that who doesn't, we all want to have comfort. We all want to have a good life. We all want to have ease. We're all seeking to make a better life for ourselves, making, living in a good neighborhood, providing a good education for our children, finding a good job, finding happiness with our spouse. We're supposed to do that. That's what every single human being wants. That's what we as Muslims want. But for us to also recognize and be aware that this constant test in its different forms is weaved into our life. And some of us know this very well because you've lived it your whole life. Some of you perhaps have been tested with poverty, and you've experienced that since you were young. Some people have been tested with their loss of their parents from a very young age, and there was a vacuum of love from long ago. Some of you have had children, and maybe there were great tribulations as it relates to your children. Some of you know this, but others, we may get complacent. And so when you see what we see right now in Palestine, if you're not ready, and if you haven't programmed yourself for that constant trial that life is, then it shakes us. And even if you are programmed, it shakes us, because what is happening there is something that most of us have never seen in our lives, as far as Muslims in front of our eyes being killed, and the country in which we live in and the money that we pay into the system of the country that we live in is aiding in the killing of our brothers and sisters. And knowing that fact in and of itself is so painful. So it is a heavy matter indeed. But one thing that is important for us to recognize is this, that we have a place to go to at all times. There is no time in our life when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His door is not open. He is not there to listen to us plead to Him when we find ourselves in any given difficulty, no matter what it may be. And so that's why when you look at our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it was said about him, إِذَا حَزَبَهُ أَمْرٌ فَزِعَ إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ. When he was overtaken by a matter, something weighed very heavy on him, what did he do? He rushed to salah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us, فَفِرُّوا إِلَى اللَّهِ. Run, flee to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the reaction for us when we find ourselves in this difficulty, it's important that we have a place to go to that should be there at the forefront of our mind. What's happening today, and I think why a lot of people are struggling, is because we are so overwhelmed with what is happening. And some young people in particular get so engrossed in the images, in the narrative, in the day-to-day following of what's exactly happening, and being drowned in these images, that we get drowned in our emotions. And what we are supposed to do is, with those emotions, make some movement. But what happens is, when you take those emotions and you just let them sit, and you don't you don't realize that, well, emotions that overtake you and that are negative, if they don't go somewhere, you're going to implode. It's going to weigh heavy on you, and you're not going to be able to bear that. We're not set up to do that. We're not set up as human beings to witness the horrific images that we see of suffering and pain of our brothers and sisters in Palestine. We're not programmed to do that. It's not normal for us to ingest that information and then just constantly take that in. If we do that, and it just sits on us, on our shoulders, it's this massive weight. And if we allow ourselves, number one, to just take all that in, well, there's going to be a consequence for us, because those emotions if you haven't programmed yourself to have a program for yourself as to what to do with that emotion, then you are going to implode. So a couple of recommendations are that, number one, personally, I don't recommend looking at the images on a constant basis for anyone. One of our teachers said something nice, though. He says, if you are someone that needs to be connected to what's going in Palestine because it motivates you, or you think it motivates you. Some people think it motivates them, but it's actually just sitting as this massive boulder on top of you. For every minute that you are looking at images, you need to carve out 1 minute of your day to make dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to offset that. And then for the rest of us who are vicariously taking all of this information in, who are hearing the news constantly from here and there, even if we're not overwhelmed, overwhelming ourselves with these images, it's important that we have programmed into our daily life, that we have set a part of our day to go to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with our complaints, to go to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with our requests, to go to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with our tears. We have to have that programmed into our day. That is the way the believer deals with calamity. That is what we learn from our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. On the night before Badr, the Battle of Badr, which was the deciding day, Yawm al-Furqan, the day that, separated truth from falsehood, the day that began the long campaign of the Muslims and the kuffar and haqq overcoming eventually batil and so forth. What was the Prophet ﷺ doing? He wasn't war strategizing. He wasn't sitting with the Sahaba, and going over this plan and that plan. He was with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in heavy times, it's important that we are connected. What happens with many people is, rather than getting connected with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to seek healing, to seek reprieve, to seek solace, to seek comfort, we implode. We're overwhelmed. I don't know what to do. I'm so distraught. I'm so distressed. I've looked at all of these things. For some people, it's their family. For some people, it's their family. And for others of us, we know, our friends who have family there. And for others, it's just, these are our Muslim brothers and sisters, and we take them as our brothers and sisters. And so we're so distressed and so distraught with that. And if we don't have it programmed into our day that, I'm going to I need to go wake up in the middle of the night. I need to set aside 5 minutes after salah and raise my hands in dua. I need to take a walk around the block and just remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If we don't have that, and we just have this, and this is what we are glued to, it can't be healthy. Logically, you all understand that. It's no way that is going to motivate you to do good if you don't have a plan to take part of your energy to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is important. Emotions are energy. And that energy, if it just sits, it will brew and it will stew inside of you. And so it's important, and I'm talking to myself, that I go somewhere with that, and I need to activate that energy in an appropriate way. So it's a very important a formula that we need to pay attention to at this point in time in particular. And for some of us, maybe waking up for tahajjud is not a normal, part of our life. For some of us, barely getting through the 5 prayers a day is an accomplishment. For some of us, fasting only in Ramadan is as much as we do. But this is the time to consciously increase your connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Take 1 day a week and fast, and then make that dua at the end of your day count. do something in your life that you are not used to doing in terms of bringing you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We need Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala now more than we have ever needed Him. And if we can't find the wherewithal within ourselves to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala now, then when will we? Right? Then when will we? If this is not enough to drive us to run to Allah, Ya Allah, this is so much for me, I need you. If this is not, then what will it be? So it's important, brothers and sisters, that we take this as an opportunity to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because look, we make the efforts that we make in terms of advocacy, in terms of raising our voice, standing in protest, taking action in various ways. But the biggest power that we have is our relationship and is these two hands with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is more powerful than anything that you have. That's why a dua, silahul mu'min. Dua is the weapon of the believer. It's a powerful phrase that the Prophet ﷺ used. It is the weapon that we have more power in this than we have with this against the enemy. That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's what the Prophet ﷺ is telling us in essence. So I take this, this opportunity tonight to kind of remind us that the action that we want to focus on for ourselves, now more than ever, is to increase in our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If that is something that you are already doing, alhamdulillah, good. If it is not, make the intention now, right? Right now at this point, Ya Allah, I am going to, and you choose, I am going to fast at least once a week, twice a week. Ya Allah, I am going to stand up in tahajjud. There's qiyam I heard tonight here in the masjid, at least once a week. Ya Allah, I am going to make dua at least once, twice a day, specifically for the people of Palestine. Ya Allah, I am going to remember you more than I do on a normal basis. Ya Allah, I am going to be regular about my adhkar in the morning or in the evening. Make that intention for yourself now. And that in and of itself is doing multiple things. Not only you're calling on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the ultimate source, but you are relieving yourself. You are relieving yourself of an anxiety, of a weight that you can't bear, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can. And so give it to Him. Make your plea to Him. Unload on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you will benefit. You will benefit your emotional, your mental, your spiritual health will all be improved as a result. All of us are are struggling in different ways because of what we're seeing. We're not our normal selves to 100%. But we should strive to be. We should strive to be. I'm not saying that means we're going to carry on life the way in which we normally do, where we're going to have parties and all of these things life has changed. There's certain things you don't do when you're mourning. When you're mourning the loss of your brothers and sisters, there's certain things we don't do. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't mean we have to feel broken. It doesn't mean that we have to feel anxious. It doesn't mean that we have to feel depressed. That is a good sign. The fact that you are emoting and you are feeling towards your brothers and sisters, that is a good sign of your faith, of your iman, that it's strong, that you care, you're not apathetic. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that we should be dysfunctional, that we should be not able to carry out our responsibilities. And we're hearing this with families, and our work with Khalil Center. We're hearing that in families, the level of distress between husband and wife is up. The level of distress between parents and children has increased. Why? Because people are not processing what's going on in an appropriate fashion, and they're taking out their emotions on each other. Right? So take that emotion, take that energy, take it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and treat your loved ones with respect, with love, with kindness, with goodness. Don't take, we don't want to be snappy, and we don't want to, yell and scream and, what do you call it? Have these sort of negative interactions with the people that are here to support us. That we need to hug each other. We need to be there for each other. We need to be able to cry with one another because we are sad, but we don't need to take that energy out on one another, right? And so, the way in which we approach that is by taking that energy to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that the energy that we share in our households can be a positive and a healthy energy. I'll stop there. Sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad.
Assalamualaikum. Can you hear me? This is not a very hijab-friendly mic, so I'm just going to hold it. But Jazakallah khair for those reminders, Sheikh Suhail. I could actually keep listening to that, but I wanted to actually start with something that you reminded me of in your talk that I actually recently shared as well in a halaqah that I did. So years ago, I was actually going through this, now I'd see it as a minor test, but one of my friends, really good friends, was practicing something that was against Islam. And she informed me of it, and she informed me that she's okay with it, right? So I came home and I was crying, and my brother came to my room, and you know how siblings are, like, why are you crying and what's going on? And so I told him, and he said, you have to stop being friends with her. And my response to that, in that very arrogant state that I called myself in, was, but I have faith. That was my response. Like, I have faith. It's okay. I can be friends with her. I have faith. And subhanAllah, after that, I was hit with a series of tests, like test after test after test after test. And one day I found myself actually on the floor of my bedroom, and you know, no one was there to help or anything. No one understood really. And I found myself on the floor of my room, and I just went to the Quran. I opened it randomly, and the first verse that I read was the Surah Ankabut. For those of you who say you have faith, do you not think you will be tested? And it gave me goosebumps, because Allah understood, right? And Allah understands all the time. He knows what you're going through. I would not be sitting here if I did not go through those tests, if I did not go to Allah, if I did not read that, and if I would be here. And time and again, Allah will remind me of that verse. He just reminded me right now. But the reason that I also wanted to share that is all of us have gone through individual tests, right? We've gone through something individually that no one understands. We've gone through something as a family, as a collective. We've been hit time and again with different trials and tests and hardships. And now the trial that we're coming to now is a very collective trial. It's as a community. We're all facing it. We all have a connection in this trial. And Allah doesn't bring that until what Sheikh Suhail was saying, that He prepares you for it. One of the things that, in preparing for this as well, I was going back to I was reflecting and I was thinking, and I'd remembered years ago again that I was reading Surah Qamar, and I had a reflection on when it talks about Prophet Nuh alayhi salam, that when he was just overwhelmed and desperate, he just turned to Allah and he said, I'm defeated. All of these people, I've been doing this for so long. All of these people, I'm just defeated. And then Allah's response is actually to send a storm, because the verses go on to, and Allah opened the skies and the rain poured, and And it's it's not what you think. You think that when the Prophet was asking for help, that Allah will be like, okay, I'll give you. But it's actually the opposite. And when I was reading that, I remember sharing with a friend, and I was saying, it's amazing that the storm, like Allah's response was the storm, and that the storm actually came to clear out and help in the hardship. And we don't often see that. Often when we go into a storm or we go into hardship, we sit back and we kind of sit in the storm thinking, why are we in this place? Not realizing that the storm is actually there to save us. Because what does Allah say after that is that He carries like Nuh alayhi salam and over His watchful eye, that He's watching us in the storm. He's watching the people of Palestine in the storm. The responses that they're having is a miracle. It's showing us the divine help that Allah is giving them. And I was also reflecting on that further, and I was thinking how Allah prepared us for this. Because before this, we were all facing, like, we heard about the earthquake in Turkey. And that was devastating. That was a natural disaster, but it was really devastating. But the stories that were coming out of that were also amazing, where children were coming out from the rubble and being saved and saying that they were fed, that these angels came and fed them. There's this whole unseen realm that we often forget and we often don't think about, that Allah is always there watching over people that are in struggles, in difficulty. And He's there with the people of Palestine. He's there inspiring them with the firmness of their faith, which is what's shaking all the enemy, the disbelievers. They're like, what is this faith? And it's bringing people to Islam. It's amazing how Allah's wisdom works in that. But it's also that He's prepared us for facing this. All of you in this room are here because you know this. And the reminder, like Sheikh Sohail said, the reminder is what benefits us. So I was reading Surah Qamar, and I was like, reflecting. I was like, wow, this is what I wanted to come back to. But then I kept reading. And then if you read that, I think you know this better, but it talks about the people of Ad, the people of Thamud, the people of Fir'aun, and how they grew in their arrogance, and then Allah just, in one swipe, they were done. That was it. They were finished. And it was amazing for me to see that, and it inspired hope in me, right? It inspired some grounding and hope that this is the answer. I was telling Sheikh Saleh, my husband, like, it's like the Quran is coming to life for me. Like, those movies where they show, like, you open the book and then the picture pops out and then it goes into the movie. That's what's coming up for me. That's what's in the Quran, right? And so when I kept reading, it was like I reflected on this more, and I thought how Allah reveals the Quran in stages. The point where I had the reflection of the storm and the storm coming to clear up, I needed that at that point. I'd read this surah so many times, I don't even know how many times, but when I read it now, it gave me what I was looking for. And that's when you go to Allah, when you go to the Quran, that's what Allah does. He gives you what you're looking for if you follow the God compass, if you have your heart inclined and calibrated to Allah. And sometimes we lose that calibration, but we have to recalibrate, right? When you go to someplace and you're going to pray, and you see everyone going with their phone like this, right? Because they have to calibrate. So we have to recalibrate at times to go back to Allah, to make sure we're centered with Allah, that we have an Allah compass. One of the biggest forms of resilience, the biggest form of going through hardships is to build hope, right? In the Quran builds hope constantly. As Muslims, we are people of optimism. We're not a people of sitting down. If you read the stories in the Quran, you read the Sirah, you read anything, it is full of extreme hardship, but extreme hope and extreme, compassion and extreme action and faith, that it keeps increasing. One of the researchers that I studied or like I came across on hope, there's this professor in Oklahoma, I think. He studied hope for 30 years. He has this whole institute of studying hope. And the reason I like to share these is because sometimes people understand things differently, right? Sometimes there's like oh, there's scientific evidence to this and research, but there is part of that, but we also have to just submit and believe that what Allah gives us is the truth. But I'll share this research with you because it's fascinating, because every time I study psychology and I study this in a way, it affirms my faith even more because of what Allah gives us. So the research, he studied hope for 30 years, 30, right? He studied it. And he found 3 things that help build hope. Hope is a very active form, right? We have to actively have hope and actively build hope. And sometimes we have to carry hope for others while they falter in hope, and then we switch, right? Sometimes we'll go down and they'll carry it. It's a relational effect. So what he found were 3 things. To build hope, you have to have 3 things. You have to have goals, pathways, and willpower. 3 things. Goals, pathways, and willpower. And all 3 are what Allah gives us, right? He gives us a goal. We're going to go to Jannah, we're going to meet Allah, this is the pathway to that. These are the things that we can do to that. This is the willpower we need to develop for that. So all 3 things match the Quran. It tells us the goal, where are we headed? Often when I work with non-Muslims, they'll go through anxiety, they'll go through depression, and then they'll be like, well, I'm better, but now what? What's my purpose? We already know the purpose. In everything that we do, in all of our hardships, we already know what our purpose is, so we have a goal. The pathways are what Allah helps us build, and some of them are actually, we lose track of it. That's the mercy of Allah. We lose track of it because it's so much a part of our life. The 5 daily salah, it's a part of our life. And I've shared this before here, but I'll share it again because I see some new faces. But even the act of salah in itself is a healing for trauma because there are movements in there. There's a research called hope, which shows hope muscles. Any form of movement, if I'm moving my arms like this or like this, it's actually building hope muscles inside of me. And then when I found that out, I also thought of Maryam alayhi salam's story, right? When she's under the tree, when she gave birth to Isa alayhi salam, and her response is, it would be better if I was dead. But what does Allah tell her to do is to get up, to move. And then she gets up and she's supposed to shake the palm tree. Has anyone ever tried shaking a palm tree? I have actually. I found a palm tree. Yeah, right? Maybe you could, but I could not shake it. And I'm like a young woman with full strength. But after childbirth, you don't have strength. You can't shake it. But what happens? She gets nourishment. There's movement. So movement, any sort of movements, builds hope muscles. That's the mercy of Allah. He has this in our own ingrained ability, right? The other fact is there's brain spotting. I studied brain spotting, which is where you look impacts how you feel. And it's what it basically is, focused mindfulness. So when we're praying, we're looking down and we're supposed to keep our eyes open. What are we doing? We're doing focused mindfulness. We're in this state. So Allah's already watching over us, like He talks about in Surah Qamar, where He's watching over us, or everywhere in the Quran, really. What are the other things? There's this, one time this guest speaker came to my stress management class, and he was it's called a Qigong, some Chinese exercise where it's supposed to be like your body movements are supposed to facilitate energy. So what does he do? He starts off with, okay, let's center ourselves. And this is the action he does. This was his action to center himself, was going like this and then going like this. Then he says, let all the stress go off. And he goes into a ruku position. And he's teaching this, and I just started laughing. We were supposed to be quiet, but I just started laughing. And I told him later, you're following what we do in Salah, right? What we pray for. And it's centering yourself. And what are we taught that in ruku, when we go in ruku, our sins fall off. And he's saying our stress falls off. But all of these things, zikr, when we're entering our home, when we're exiting our home, we do these azkar. So the angels are with us, they're watching over us. When we wake up in the morning, right, a lot of times we're like, oh my God, I need coffee. I need to wake up, I need coffee. But what do? We praise Allah in the morning for giving us life after death. is such a positive reframe. We were lifeless just a second ago, and when we wake up, it's like praising Allah and we're ready to face the day. It's already putting you in a positive reframe. Right? It's a very, if you look into what Allah gives us, the tools, and I could keep going on, this could be like a whole day seminar, right? I could keep going on because I've actually looked into these different things that we do. Another interesting research, I was in a trauma training class, and they told us that when you, the professor was just asking, you know, what helps with trauma? And someone just joked and said, naps. You know, he said, actually, there's research, if you take a nap between, like in the late afternoon for 15 to 20 minutes, it actually helps in healing trauma. And that's the sunnah. So it's, you know, it's amazing that all of these things that will come up, that they're already part of our habit. And so that's where Allah builds the pathways. Without us even knowing, He's building the pathways, and what we have to do is build intentionality. Once we know this, right, we know this information, when we're standing for prayer, we can know that this is what we're doing. Like Allah is already doing, like our body and Allah are combined doing work to heal ourselves. There's another research, I'm telling you, I could keep going on. The vagus nerve is connected to our sympathetic system where trauma affects the nervous system, right? Listening to Quran, there's research that listening to Quran actually calms that and helps the trauma. Like it helps calm the vagus nerve and has an effect where it's soothing and it can affect. Breathing, when you do tajweed, you know how they say take a deep breath? Breathing, when you're breathing a certain way with tajweed, it helps the nervous system. So there are these things, and if we become more mindful and intentional, we can understand that it's not just random how Allah works. There is wisdom in what He does, and He's already given us these pathways. Now, what happens is, oftentimes when we're hit with a lot of trauma or a lot of hardship, our willpower kind of depletes. Right now, that's something that we can all face, right? That happens to us. Our willpower goes down. So what this researcher, Dr. Chan, what he found was, in order to build willpower, what do you need? Like, what is the one thing, the instrumental thing to build willpower? He said it's imagination. Now, if you look at the Quran, it's full of imagery. It's full of giving us imagination. Surah Rahman, this is what Jannah will be like. It's full of giving us imagination of the past, of what did the companions go through, what did the prophets go through, and how did they overcome, that they were victorious. It's full of all these visuals that we can imagine. Besides that, when we know that when, like, you know, little things like when a child dies, he's waiting for his parents at the gates of Jannah, he or she, right? These visuals are actually meant to help us build hope. The stories that are coming out of passing of how people who passed away, how they're smelling. It's like the senses that we're having, the smell that's coming of musk, that they're smiling. We actually don't even have to have a visual. We see the pictures of some of them smiling, beaming. And it's like I forgot which surah it is, but the one surah that talks about how this man was calling people to faith, and these messengers, and he's calling people to faith, and then they started beating him up. And he said, he was shown Jannah, and he said, if only my people could see what I see, right? There are all of these images and visuals that we are given to help us to sustain hope. So we build these pathways. So the other aspect that he found, so these were the three things. The other aspect he found was social connectedness, that we have to be surrounded by people that help us to build that hope. And so that's what we're doing now. One of the biggest factors that we know that helps in being present and functioning is relational connectedness and historical connectedness. So Allah gives us the historical connectedness with telling us all of these stories of prophets and companions and filling that with the Quran so that we know the lessons. We know what's going to happen. We actually even know the future, right? Not like in a preview, but we know what's going to happen. Allah's told us. Allah's promise is true. That verse actually can calm anyone's anxiety. Allah's promise is true. What Allah gives us is true. So we already know what's going to happen. We're connected to that, but we will go through all of these emotions. We know what happened in the past. We're connected to that, and we have to be connected to each other. coming here and then connecting to each other and working on ourselves. What the Sheikh said in terms of how we do focus on ourselves and what do we need to do. There's a lot that we have in our control. We need to work on our tazkiyah. That's my personal reflection. I need to work on things and recognize things that I need to do to improve myself. So one of the things I realized was in the rush of work and everything, I was not praying my sunnah as often. So now I've made a conscious decision. I'm going to start praying sunnah. These little changes can all add up. What I want to end with, that I feel like will bring all of this together is the story of Musa alayhi salam. We keep hearing that in this as well, the story of Musa alayhi salam, how he was by the sea and the army was behind him and he had this tawakkul in Iman. But one of the things that I reflect on is he built that, right? When he first went to Allah, he was afraid. He lived a life where he was afraid, but then Allah takes the fear and the anxiety that he feels and builds on that. He anchors himself in different moments that when he faces the sea or the water and the armies behind him and all the people around him are like, that's it, we're done for. He has anchored himself so much with Allah and has built that hope that he's like, no, Allah's not going to leave me. It's not going to happen. Like it's not even possible, right? And I know we hear about this with Musa alayhi salam, but there are actually red seas that we also face in our personal life. And I've seen this, I've witnessed this happen for a lot of people, that they will face a situation where they don't see a way out. I don't see a way out. Like I'm sitting with them, I'm like, I don't even know how this is going to happen. But they have that belief with Allah, and the sea parts, a way comes out. We have these in our lives too, and if we pay attention, if we have the Allah compass going, we will see these come out. And so Musa still has to take that step of putting the staff down and the sea parts, and then Allah helps him with the rest. Right? We do our part, and then Allah helps. So what I wanted to end with is we have to find these anchors in our life. We have to make the intention and build hope actively. We can't sit back, right? We're doing the action, we're doing what we can, and every person will have different expertise, right? Every person can do different things. And so we can't judge the other person, well, why are you not at protests? Why are you not doing this, right? We can't, that's not building empathy, that's not building connectedness. We have to build the hope that we can with ourselves internally, focus on what we can do internally, and then focus on what we can do externally. And so while we anchor ourselves in these moments, and one of the exercises that I want you to do, and I actually, at the back, Sister Fatma has this, Sister Fatma's one in blue, she has note cards. So oftentimes we'll hear this, we hear talks, we'll come here, we'll be inspired, and then we'll go home and it's back to routine. But I want you to take a note card and I want you to write down one or two things that you want to implement in your life right now, starting today, reading more Quran, praying your sunnah, praying tahajjud, doing more azkar, anything that you see, I want you to write it down and keep it with you and hold yourself accountable and start practicing it. So we have to do, and then even with finding buddy system, right? Having a buddy to find yourself. I did this group therapy with some high school boys, and they were talking about how procrastination is like something they all do, or like they lose motivation. And so when they were talking about, okay, what can we do to do it? They actually pick buddies amongst each other that, okay, you're gonna hold me accountable. And it was funny because one of them was like, okay, you hold me accountable, but then they're like, no, you never answer your phone, so I'm not gonna pick you, like, the other person. So it was actually very good for them to realize that too. But hold yourself to a higher standard where Allah sees your worth. The fact that we are in this place, it's a mercy from Allah to show us the reality of the world and to instill in us hope and to show us, like, the people passed away before us that did not see what's happening in Palestine right now. So they could not see the truth. We see the truth now. We're living the truth of what Allah told us, and that in itself should instill faith and iman and hope in us, and should inspire us to come closer to Allah. in ways that, we can and we have capacity for. So I'll end there, inshallah. I think we have questions now. Exactly.
So inshallah, we have a slideshow up on the screens. You guys can scan the QR code or add that link into your search bar, inshallah, and ask questions. So we have our first question. How can you deal with your relationship with Allah weakening after seeing what's happening in Palestine?
Bismillah. So, how can you deal with your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala after it's weakened, huh? I think a lot of us have been overwhelmed with emotion, and that emotion holds us down and limits us from being able to get up and do what we normally do. And so I think it's important that we spend some time reflecting on what is going on within us, inside of us. Why am I feeling what I'm feeling? There needs to be some pause and some self reflection on that, on that particular matter. And we need to ask ourselves, you know, why is it that I'm feeling this way? Literally, why is it that I'm feeling this way? Some people are able to kind of talk through that themselves, and it may be helpful to talk through that with someone else that you know, that you trust. If the feelings are very heavy and they are incapacitating you, right, then that may be a point, that may be the limit that you've reached where, well, wait a second, maybe I need to get some professional help, right, and to sit and talk with a counselor or a therapist to kind of process what's going on internally. So there needs to be that exploratory sort of phase to kind of locate what is going on. Why am I feeling this way? Why has my connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreased? What there is usually something there emotionally that's shut off, and then that leads to some cognitive shut off. So kind of tracking it down, and the way you do that is to start processing that out. Start processing that out. And then once you're able to kind of find some peace with that, then it's your time to, well, pivot and say, okay, now I need to maybe start reestablishing whatever it is that I used to do, my ibadah, and so forth. So, we don't do this much as human beings anymore because we're so busy just keeping ourselves busy, right? And so putting this down and taking the time to process with ourselves, to sit with ourselves, to self-introspect is a lost art. It's a lost art. And if you don't do that, there's no way you're going to be able to dig into the deeper layers of your own soul. Allahu Ta'ala. I don't know if Sister Sabrina has something to add to.
I think exactly that. In the Quran, it keeps saying, will you not reflect? And I think that is an art, like Sheikh Sohail said, that we lose, and to sit with the Quran, to sit with our emotions and to process it, and to process it in a safe space too, with someone that you trust. And the important thing is someone who is also Allah oriented, who has a Allah compass, because oftentimes we can process with someone and talk to someone about these emotions. And then I've heard this even now recently, and they will take you away from Allah. And then you have to be conscious and intuitive to know that that's not someone I can talk to. I have to go to someone that will not weaken my faith, but will increase my faith. The other part is we also have to know that shaitan is our enemy, and shaitan will lead us to despair. And so when we're feeling that weak state, we have to understand that it is also like these unseen elements, and so to seek refuge with Allah from that and to go back to Allah in that. And it takes action and active effort to keep building our relationship with Allah and our attachment.
So the next question is, how do you deal with the guilt of not doing enough, and how do you measure our capacity and performance according to that?
Why do you keep looking at me? So, guilt is a tricky thing. So, this is what happens with people. They start feeling down, and then they say, well, why do I feel down? Because look at these other, I'm comfortable in life, and look at what the people in Palestine, for example, what they're facing, and why am I feeling this way? And so you start to kind of double beat yourself up. You follow what I'm saying? Like the guilt compounds itself. And so, I think it's important to sometimes push that feeling aside. Like it's okay. It's okay to have a heavy heart. It's okay to, at times, for our faith practice, for our ibadat, to take a little dip. Al-iman yazid wa yanqus, as the scholars they say. Iman, it goes up and down, it fluctuates. That's the nature of iman. Now, we have a base level that we need to maintain. That's not negotiable, right? 5 daily prayers, that's not negotiable. And maybe if you have certain other practices established in your life that you always had, maybe for you those are non-negotiables. But if beyond that certain things are dipping, and that's okay. If there's a little pause, if there's, because you're heavy and you're burdened and maybe your responsibilities have increased in other fashions, you don't need to beat yourself up over that, right? That can become an unhealthy thing. But if it's impeding in our core practices that are part of our life, and that need to be a part of our life, that are obligations that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has over us, then that needs some deeper introspection and some deeper reflection. But at the same time, we also have to be merciful with ourselves, be forgiving to ourselves. If we've had a rough day, we've had a rough day. We've had a rough week, we've had a rough week. If we've had, some difficulties with our children or in other aspects of life at our job, and that impacts, that happens. That's part of the cycle of life, right? And so we don't need to be overly hard on ourselves either. Some people are just mad driven, and if they fall short, they take that hard on themselves. That can be an unhealthy sort of, mindset to hold to.
I was going to say, one of the beauties of Islam is that it's a very balanced religion. So I'll give an example of, in Khalid Center, we were taught Islamic psychology, and we were studying Ghazali and characters and vices and virtues. And so, for example, if someone is wise, has the virtue of wisdom, and is on one extreme of being very intelligent, but using it in the wrong way, that can be harmful, right? Or it's on the other extreme of extremely ignorant, and that can be harmful too. So wisdom and using it with the right intention is good. So with guilt as well, when we feel like it's going off balance, we have to recalibrate and come back and then see like what is going on. The other thing is, one of the ways to combat guilt is also gratitude, to have gratitude. What we have here, we have blessings, and to have a recognition of our blessings. It's in the Quran that Allah will give you more, like Allah will increase you if you're grateful. So to combat guilt with gratitude and everything else that shakes that.
Jazakallah. So the next question is kind of related to the last one. How can you deal with the guilt of doing basic things like showering and eating because the Palestinians cannot do them?
So yeah, continuing off of the same thing, there is a, Khalid Center has been doing support groups, and inshallah we actually have one here on Sunday as well. I think it's at 1 o'clock. The information is at the back, but we've been doing some online. And one of the people that attended that support group, she actually said she feels guilty because her daughter spilled water, and she thought, the people in Palestine, they don't have water, and her daughter is spilling water. And so she felt really guilty. And that's a very guilt is actually a sign that your heart is alive. Guilt in that manner of taking a shower and recognizing these blessings that we have, it's a sign that our heart is alive. Now, when our heart is alive, what do we do with it? Do we just sit there in the guilt, or do we use guilt as a movement to go back to Allah, to take action, and to use that emotion as energy to bring more change, to bring something better, and to change it and motivate ourselves to do good? Because what shaitan will do is tell you to sit in that guilt. You just took a shower, you just took a 30-minute shower. It's like, well, not a 30-minute, sometimes we need that. But you just took a shower, you just ate all this food, you just went out, you got all these groceries. Think of your brothers and sisters in Palestine, astaghfirullah, like look at you. Yes, you are thinking of your brothers and sisters in Palestine. While like one practice that I'm doing is when I see that and I do feel the guilt creeping up, I'll make dua for them. I'll ask Allah to feed them. Because we don't know how Allah will feed them. Allah just sent rain to them and gave them water. We don't know how Allah will feed them. We don't know how Allah will take care of them, or even comforting their hearts. Allah says in the Quran, when Musa alayhi salam's mother was grieving and almost broke, that He comforted her heart. So we don't know the effect of our dua and how Allah is answering. It may not be the way that we see it, but it may be in different ways. And so to channel that guilt, and while we're using our blessings, to be grateful and then channel it into dua and action and what we can do.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, jazakumullah khairan, that's so important what you said, Sister Sabrine. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, نَحْنُ قَسَمْنَا بَيْنَهُمْ مَعِيشَتَهُمْ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيا. That we have, this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying, that we have divided between them, their lot, their share. Everybody has a different share that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them in life. Some people have more, some people have less. That's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we should appreciate what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, but not take it for granted. Right? Take advantage of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you. Use it for good, but don't take it for granted. But we're not required to self-implode and feel guilty for having things that Allah hasn't given to other people. That's not a healthy mindset. It doesn't do anything for us. It doesn't take us forward in any kind of way. Be thankful for what you have, but don't take it for granted. Take advantage of what you have, use it for good, but don't just, look at it as if it's nothing. But then that's, so we want to avoid extremes. Islam is we're always, conscious of avoiding extremes. We don't want to be completely neglectful and just, apathetic and not paying attention, heedless, ghafil, and nor do we want to fall in this trap of, oh my God, I have all of these things and these other people have, and they don't have anything, and it's just life is too much, and then you just fall flat. You're not able to function. Stay in the middle.
All right, Jazakumullah khair, Sister Sabrine and Sheikh Sohail. Inshallah, we have part 2 of this event tomorrow, tomorrow from 1:30 to 3 p.m. in the Women's Prayer Hall. We also have a qiyam today that is going to be led by Qadi Abdul Qadir, inshallah, at 10:55 p.m. There is resources in the back with the MCA Wellness Committee as well as Kila Center. So please be sure to check that out on your way out. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu
I
alaikum.
think you meant 9:55, not 10:55.
10 p.m. inshallah. All right. Jazakumullah khair.
Jazakallah khair.